everyone, and welcome to episode 32 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm Danielle Cebulski, also known as the 5-Minute Medievalist. If you ask a handful of people which medieval movies they've seen, they may come up with a Robin Hood or two, but the chances are at least one of them will say Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It may be the best known of all medieval movies, and it's a classic well outside of the borders of our field. Last week, Peter Konieczny, editor of Medievalists.net and Medieval Warfare magazine, went to see a screening of the movie at the local theater to see what it would be like to experience it as a medievalist in 2019. We sat down to have a quick chat about the movie, its impact, and some of our favorite moments. So Peter and I both rewatched Monty Python and the Holy Grail this week. Peter watched it in a theater with a whole bunch of other nerds, and I rented it at home because I couldn't make it that night. So, Peter, how was it watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail with a whole bunch of nerds in 2019?
It was great. I really enjoyed it. You get that theater experience, so like that was something I was like, oh, I have to try it out and see how it was, and it's cool being with the kind of crowd, that nerd crowd, yes, that wants to kind of sing along. Say all the great catchphrases. So, yes, so I really enjoyed it.
This movie, it's getting to be kind of long in the tooth. When did it come out?
It came out in 1975. So basically, it's over 40 years old. And yeah, I think we're going to talk about how it does kind of show its age a bit. But it's interesting thing. So it's just early years of Monty Python. They kind of just wanted to create a film. They decided they were going to look at it kind of King Arthur, and they just as kind of half the film, but they went ahead and made it all of that on a budget of $400,000.
When I was talking to Kathleen Kennedy in our first episode of the podcast, we were talking about using coconuts in that film because they could not afford to use horses. So it ended up being a joke, but a joke that works really well. But the truth is they couldn't afford horses. They couldn't afford pretty much anything, right?
Yeah. It's like they kind of use the same kind of sets over and over again, the same kind of castle. There's even one shot of like a landscape shot. It's just a photo, and they put like candles underneath it to give it a kind of moving look. But that is it. That is like as cheap as you can possibly do. So look for this shot, and there's a place in Australia too.
It's a place in Australia?
Yes, they use that as a background shot. It's like some photo of a place in Australia.
That's funny. Because most of it was filmed in Scotland. A lot of it was filmed at one of my favorite castles, Doune Castle, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, filmed mostly in Scotland, not Australia. But you were talking about how it's kind of shown its age. So what did you mean by it's starting to show its age a bit?
I think, I like, for the most part, I like the film. I think, in terms of filmmaking, partly because it kind of was so cheaply done, but also I think maybe the kind of standards of how films would be shot. So you've got really close-up scenes. Like you just see the the actors, their faces, which is, that's kind of odd. Like you don't see that, in any kind of like movie from the last 20 years, 30 years. So that's, I think, kind of like a 70s kind of thing. Just the way the presentation, you are watching a film from the 70s. You, like some of the dialogue is that, like some of the maybe risqueness of the scenes would be kind of like, oh, this is what could be passed in 1975. So
yeah, there were a couple moments where some of the jokes you're like, oh, these are not jokes that we'd write in 2019, perhaps. And there's only a couple of those moments, though. I thought most of it pretty much stands up in terms of the script. It's still funny like it was back in the 70s, but there are a few moments, like you said.
Yeah, it's. I think when I look back at you, like if you wanted to kind of rate it as a film, there's a lot of lacking. Like there's not much character development in these. There's not much plot really. Like probably some of the kind of weakest moments are that kind of like, oh yes, we're going for the Holy Grail, yes, and this is what we're supposed to do, and that kind of stuff. They rush it so much. Like I've seen the film, and there's like scenes that stand out, and then watching it again, it's there are these other scenes that that you just completely forget about because they're just oddly shot and short and not really important. So
yeah, I think that's kind of evident in that, it's a sketch comedy group and they're just looking for an excuse to put together a whole bunch of medieval jokes, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. Like I think as Canadians, we have this appreciation for like the kind of sketch comedies of like SCTV generation and Kids in the Hall, things like that. And I think it's British too, but maybe other parts of the world, it's like, like, this is an excuse to let's do a bunch of scenes and see how funny we can make it.
And they're super, super nerdy. So, like, for the people who don't really know this, there are a bunch of the people in Monty Python, they went to Oxford, and they were medievalists as well. So Terry Jones especially, medievalist, and he wrote a whole bunch of books on medieval stuff. I have a couple of them, and he was a public historian getting stuff about the Middle Ages out there. So you can see he has a real heavy influence in it. And I think he plays Sir Bedivere in it. I think Sir Bedivere the Wise.
Yeah, he plays that. Others, there's 5 members of this of the Monty Python troupe. John Cleese, Terry Gilliam,
Eric Idle.
Yeah, Eric Idle.
Terry Jones.
All right. Yes. And they play multiple characters in the film, just because again they don't have the budget for other kind of big actors or anything like that. So you see John Cleese playing like a French knight, and then you see him playing Sir Lancelot, and then he's the Black Knight as well. So
and Tim the Enchanter. Don't forget about Tim.
Yes. So they've got like. They just keep going and going, bringing them in again and again. So it's great to kind of see them kind of just play these multiple roles.
So as a medievalist, what are some of your favorite moments in this movie? Because like so many of them are really informed by stuff from the Middle Ages. There's got to be something that sticks out in your mind as like some of your favorite scenes.
One of my favorite scenes is the Sir Lancelot attacking the castle. He gets this letter that's shot out of a window. It shoots his squire, which he leaves him there to not die. But he goes charging to save what he thinks is a princess in the castle that's going to be forced to have a marriage. So he goes in, and it's just this great scene where the guards are watching him charge for like a good minute up, like he's just going, and then he gets there, he kills the guy right off the bat, and then he goes on this massacre of all the people in the castle, which are just like ladies and like the cook, and like no one's fighting him. He like attacks the bride, so everything like that, and goes in and finally finds the what he thinks is a princess is actually the prince, who gets killed in the end too, so by his own father.
It's kind of funny. It's, as somebody who's read a lot of medieval romance, watching Sir Lancelot charge just headfirst into fighting everybody without getting on the facts first is funny for me. And then, he gets up to the tower and he meets the prince, and he's a little bit befuddled because he's thinking it's going to be a princess and it's a prince. And then the prince tells his father, he's here to rescue me, and Lancelot says, well, let's not jump to conclusions. Meanwhile, he's done all this like typical Lancelot, like slaughtering everybody on the way in. It's not usually such a big deal in medieval romance, but there's a little bit of a fallout in this movie from all of Lancelot's slaughtering.
So we get the great little French jokes thrown in at the English, which is I think repeated as nauseum by the crowd. So we have that. I really like also is the kind of scenes where they actually bring in everybody, all this army out, and they like, oh, this is where you spent your money.
Yeah, I suppose the budget was just for the big army that kind of has no place in the rest of the movie. Were there any other spots that you really like?
An early scene of them talking to peasants.
Right, the peasants who are collecting filth, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that is a very dated scene because it's all kind of like communist utopia the peasants are talking about, and but it is so funny, just the reactions and how King Arthur kind of goes from like being a noble guy to just getting angry, and like, and then finally, attacking the peasant. Help, I'm being repressed. It's great to see like how Arthur is played. He's played very straight, throughout most of the film. Like, he talks in this kind of medieval-esque speech. He's very high and mighty, but when he gets flustered, he starts talking like a 70s guy. So that's, like, with bollocks and, stuff like that. It's again, I there's so many things with this film, like, as you watch, like, it's very funny. It's a nice little play on medieval kind of tropes or medievalist tropes. So, it's funny, like, I don't know there's not many kind of medieval movies that I've seen from in eras before. So, like, it's hard to see how there's, what they're making fun of in terms of film, like other medieval films. But even modern day films, like, you could go back and look at it and say it's making fun of a film from 2005. Right, which is not possible, but it's still the same kind of, it makes fun of those tropes.
Yeah, and for me, it directly makes fun of just medieval stuff. So it doesn't even need to refer back to a film. It refers back to, medieval romance for sure. So some of the things that stuck out for me, that some of my favorite parts and stuff that, you forget about is Sir Robin. Brave Sir Robin and his minstrels, talking about how brave he is and how he's not afraid to be, maimed and have his head cut off. They're all singing behind him about how he's not afraid of these terrible, terrible bodily punishments, which is so funny because, like, so many of that kind of thing will show up in medieval romance. Or Sir Galahad, he shows up at that castle full of maidens.
Castle Anthrax, it's called.
That's right, Castle Anthrax. And it's full of all these maidens who are just ready to throw themselves at him. And, they say, "What is your name?" Sir Galahad, the Chaste. And it's just, the more you read medieval romance, the funnier this gets, because, there's always castles full of maidens that you come across, and they always make trouble for knights. And even if you look at a lot of medieval romance, knights often get injured in the thigh. And I didn't realize that until watching this movie again. Galahad's got a thigh wound that the ladies are trying to take care of, and he's going, no, get away. So that's another thing that I thought was kind of funny. Sir Robin and the Castle of Maidens was a good one too. And the rabbit. Should we talk about the rabbit?
Oh yeah, and because we've come across kind of pieces on medievalist.net where we're talking about, like, where Arthur has to fight like a kitten. It really actually probably makes sense, like, where this little rabbit is the guardian of this cave. And it turns out to be a ferocious monster, which is great. I love it when they just say, "Run away." I think in one way it subverts, like, what your expectations, like, like, because we never, like, see, like, a modern film where, like, the monster is such a little tiny, fun little, creature, but it could be something that you could see from the Middle Ages, right?
Yeah, so I went diving around the internet a little bit before we had our talk tonight, and I was looking at the Wikipedia entry, as you do, about this, and there is one on this killer rabbit itself. It's the killer rabbit of Caerbannog, and it was saying that, after this movie, people started to think about rabbits as possibly being killer rabbits. Just a little side note, Wikipedia showed me that you can ask Siri what Siri's favorite animal is, and she or he will say, "I wrote my master's thesis on the killer rabbit of Caerbannog." So there's a little nerd thing for you. But the thing is that there are killer rabbits all over medieval manuscripts. They are charging at people with lances. They are fighting people with axes. They are doing all sorts of crazy things. So, like, this killer rabbit thing is not something they dreamed up as just being hilarious. Like, this is going straight back to the Middle Ages as well.
Yeah, you wonder, like, how much, like, they were able to, like, we're going to take this little bit of medieval tale, and not many people know about it. Like, I think we remember in your first episode, you're talking about coconuts. Like, well, I wonder how much they knew that there was coconuts in medieval England, and so I'm sure that there's like much of the commentaries. This movie has gone on again and again, so I think if you kind of delve really deep into it, you could probably learn a lot about how they came up with the ideas. in the script and things like that. But like, yeah, we do have, these are people that have an interest in the Middle Ages. Terry Jones in particular, you know, he's gone on to kind of write some books and do some documentaries about the medieval world. So yeah, I think it's very good. Like, and even with their animations, they're a lot of them are kind of based and even taken literally right off of medieval manuscripts, butts playing horns and stuff like that. I'm sure that's somewhere in the Middle Ages. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All that marginalia, it's put to good use in this movie. This is kind of a crazy idea where people were saying, let's put together a bunch of stuff from the Middle Ages and it's going to be funny. And this is like real nerd humor. It's kind of revolutionary that they were able to make this movie. And this has been voted one of the funniest movies of all time on all sorts of lists. And it's kind of funny because, you know, the more you know about the Middle Ages, the nerdier it is, the funnier it is. And one of the things that cracks me up about it is they really lean into these ideas about our stereotypes around the Middle Ages. So I mean like the villages at the beginning, you know, bring out your dead. It's so muddy and filthy. There's peasants that are collecting filth. There are monks that are beating themselves on the head with boards, you know, and there's such violence. I mean, like the whole thing about being just a flesh wound. All of this stuff is really extreme based on what we think the Middle Ages is like. And it's actually a joke about it not actually being like that. But I think a lot of people watching it think this is kind of just what the Middle Ages were like.
Well, there's a great spoof trailer about Monty Python and Grail where it's presented as a serious movie. And they take the lines and take some of the action, like none shall pass, you know, and they set it out in that way. And we'll put it in the show notes. But it is just a classic, like said, like they take like a subject that can be really serious and really dark and lots of blood and lots of fighting. There is like some nice swordplay actually. When the Black Knight, before he faces Arthur, he has this good fight scene. So there's a bit of that, right? A small amount of kind of special effects, so which is mostly like little bombs blowing off in the mountains behind. So it's interesting how they can kind of take that, like, you know, and it presented as a bit of a serious way, right? So, and others can kind of see it like that.
Yeah, because we have these ideas about the Middle Ages being so filthy and so violent and so religious in a way that's kind of brainless. And so it's funny to see this kind of played as a joke, but not everyone might get that joke. And that's kind of what speaks to me about it.
When they kind of make fun of these kind of tropes, they're also kind of reinforcing it. You get like kind of scenes where like people are just being chopped up into bits, right? And it's just a flesh wound, right? So yeah, now that happens all the time. So you have to think, like, you know, lots of people like in like 70s that say, hey, this is how they got into the Middle Ages. Yeah, they're making fun of it, but you know, must be some of it true, right?
Yeah, some of it is like really exaggerated, like I'm saying, people collecting filth and stuff, and some of it is real kind of gentle humor aimed at medievalists. Like I'm thinking of when they bring out the witch and they're explaining, well, how do you know she's a witch? And how do you know, how are they going to test to see if she's a witch? And they have to figure out, you know, does she weigh the same amount as a duck? And King Arthur comes up and he's the one who comes up with the correct answer, which is, you know, if she's made of wood and she's a witch, she'll weigh the same amount as a duck. And Sir Bedivere says, you know, how did you learn so much about science? How did you become so wise about science? But this kind of an argument kind of speaks to medievalists in the way that it's very logical how it's set out. And yet, you know, to us, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, like it has that kind of interesting kind of way that just plays with what like us historians, including killing a historian.
Yeah, that's right. There's a historian that doesn't make it in this film.
Yeah, yeah, and funny because he's there to kind of give a little exposition, but he gets killed by one of Arthur's knights, which turns into a little bit of this kind of running gag. That, we won't kind of spoil it in, but it features into the ending of the film. So
Yeah, so there's this kind of venerable old historian who's there and explaining what happens with Arthur and his knights. And it's funny because it's so familiar to people who watch this kind of historical documentary, this Tweety guy who's telling you what actually went on.
I wish he was actually a historian, but apparently he's also the old man that gets killed in To Bring Out Your Dead.
Well, yeah, you got to recycle
recycle the extras, right? So
that means he dies twice. That's pretty impressive.
I wish we could give more shout outs to the kind of like smaller cast, all these squires and things like that who play a little bit. But
I mean, this is such a cult movie that you just have to Google it. It will be everywhere. You can find everyone that was ever part of this film, I have no doubt, on the internet.
Yeah, like this, it's funny. Like this was a film that was immediately successful. It wasn't something that it kind of built up its audience in time. It got a budget of $400,000. It made $5 million. It was the biggest English film in North America that year. After that, I think it solidified Monty Python. They made several other films after that. They have never kind of disappeared from the kind of comedic scene. Although, at this stage, they're, more or less in retirement. They kind of come out. But there's even a play that goes on. It just kind of continues. Literally, this is a film that they, we're going to show this in 2019 and expect to have people come out, which people do. So it is, it's a very successful film.
It's successful enough that people are coming out in 2019 to a movie theater. But not only that, they know all the words. And I think there are many places where you could go and just say a few of the words from this movie and people can spout off the rest right next to you. Silly English connectis, for example. People will just come out with it. And they'll be fans for life, which is kind of interesting. I think their next movie was The Life of Brian, which is, again, kind of based on the story of Jesus' life. So Life of Brian was even more successful when you look back on it. And even now people are calling it, the funniest movie of all time. But that kind of made me think about the holy hand grenade in Monty Python and the Holy Grail and how that was explained. Do you remember they had to read from the Book of Armaments, which is so funny.
And I think when I was young, I was like, yeah, that could be a holy hand grenade. There must be based on something. I was like, I think that was my early age of getting into medieval warfare. It's like, yeah, so we're going to learn about hand grenades, medieval hand grenades, which there kind of is in the Middle Ages. It's not totally out there. There could have been a holy hand grenade of Antioch.
It's actually based on a piece of royal regalia. It's it looks like a royal orb that was, signifying that someone was royal. Instead, it's a holy hand grenade. And you're right, it kind of looks like one. And you wonder where they got that idea from.
It all plays with ideas of relics, even the book explaining it is, it's a medieval tome, stuff like that. They have these church guys just following him along, which they only bring out for this kind of one scene. But yeah, if you're in an army, yeah, there is the kind of church officials, almost kind of, priests and stuff like that following. There would be, in the kind of entourage, but they're just set back because they're not important until they're needed for the story.
They're coming to explain it. The part that I really liked was when they explained how you count to 3. And they explained it in this kind of biblical way that goes just over and over and over again to make sure that they have it clear, which is so familiar when you read some medieval books, especially explanations. I thought that was so funny.
And of course they get it wrong. Just trying to count to 3 is not done particularly well. So, but it wins. It succeeds in the end. That apparently that poor rabbit. They didn't kill the rabbit. They brought in a stunt double for that. But the original rabbit got a lot of red paint on it. So.
Yeah, it's covered in red paint, isn't it?
Yes, and they were not supposed to do that. So if you're an animal rights person, it's probably not the greatest example of filmmaking. So, but at least no horses were harmed in the film. So,
That's right. You get around that with coconuts for sure. Do you have any last thoughts on rewatching Monty Python and the Holy Grail at the movies?
It's something I've always wanted to do. I had this kind of opportunity, so it was interesting to see it like on a big screen. How it's seen, it's jarring how different it is from a modern day film. So for the most part, it stands up, and it is extremely funny.
Yeah, I would say Monty Python and the Holy Grail is something you should watch at the beginning of your journey into medieval studies, and you should watch it definitely after you are a few years into your journey into medieval studies. So watch it at the beginning of your undergraduate degree, for example, and watch it at the end, and you'll find so many more jokes in it that are so much funnier once you've learned a little bit more about the Middle Ages.
Hey, before we start talking about what's on medievalist.net, we have something to tell the audience about you.
Yes. Okay. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Peter. It's very smooth.
Very smooth.
Smooth is your middle name. So, in case you are not following me or us on social media, I was just granted the award from the Lone Medievalist for Scholarly Outreach for 2019, which is really it's a huge honor for me because it's recognizing the work I've done as the 5 Minute Medievalist and this podcast as being valuable in our field for public outreach. And so this is just an amazing honor for me, and I'm really, really excited about that. So in case you haven't seen it already, I'm super excited to have just been given this award. So yay.
Congratulations, Danielle. And to be serious, I think you are a very deserving person for this work. You've been doing great work. Okay, you started a 5 Minute Medievalist way back about 10 years ago. Joined us on medievalist.net 6 years ago. I think you're a classic example of a person that can reach out to the wider world and talk about the Middle Ages. And you do it really well, and I'm really proud of you. And I'm the one that benefits the most from your work. So thank you on my behalf. So
You're very welcome, Peter, and thank you. That was very kind of you. What?
I have a second announcement.
Hooray!
The Medieval Podcast has now reached 100,000 downloads.
Woohoo!
In fact, it blew by it. It's at around 105,000 downloads as of last week. And again, I want to thank you. You've been putting a lot of work into this, lots of late nights doing editing, especially when I'm on the podcast, because you have to edit me down to nothing. But, and I just, again, I want to thank you for all the work you've been doing, and you are awesome.
Thank you, Peter. That's really kind. And this is the first I'm hearing about us passing 100,000 downloads. That's really awesome, especially because we just started this in January, and we'll be honest with you, it was as an experiment to see if this is something that we could do, something that people wanted, and something that was actually feasible for us to do. So to have it pass 100,000 downloads, that's really, really awesome. Thanks for that news, Peter. Awesome.
Well, congratulations for both. You're a well-deserving award and a really big audience.
Yes, thank you. That Peter said to me when we got to be at around 80,000 that it was the size of a small city, which is both really inspiring and really intimidating at the same time. And now we've passed 100,000 listens, so that's awesome. Thanks. So you're going to tell us what's on the website? Because there's always good stuff on the website. Oh, and in case I didn't say this earlier on, and I might have to edit this around, but thank you to the Lone Medievalist for not only giving me this award, but for having this award. When I heard about it, I was so excited because public history is such an important thing. Reaching out to people and making sure that they know stuff about history, or at least are interested in history, is so important. So in case I didn't say thank you enough, thank you to the Lone Medievalist and all the Lone Medievalists who were involved in the process. Thank you so much. And for people who have just been hearing about this award right now, if you check out the Lone Medievalist, and we'll give you that information, you can see who's won for best teachers. Not just outreach, but there's a whole bunch of other categories as well where people are being recognized, and they should be, because they're awesome. Okay, Peter, what's on the website?
Hey, we've got some more news that came out. If you want to know what Scotland looks like genetically, there is now a map out, and kind of tells the tales of where the Vikings wound up, where the English wound up, where Scots were the Scots you can find in Ireland. So that's all kind of been put together. So you can check that out. There's news about archaeological research dealing with the Mongol invasion of Russia. So that was quite interesting. There's discoveries on that. And you can also do a quiz on how well you know your Viking Age artifacts. So try that out this week on medievalist.net.
Yeah, Peter challenged me to that one, and I respectfully declined because Viking artifacts are not my thing. But there are a few things that I definitely recognize, and I would have got Peter, for sure. Good job putting that together.
Thanks. Go try it out, everyone. So
before we go, we should talk for one more minute about our book club, right? So there are some people who had already joined our book club at the end of August, and they are reading the Sutton Hoo story this month, and we're going to talk about it at the end of this month, September. This is a book club that we are putting together in partnership with Boydell and Brewer, and if you join our Patreon at the proper level, then you get a book in the mail every month, and you can read along with us, and we'll have a Google Hangout. I think it's going to be Google Hangouts. We're ironing that out at the end of the month, and you can talk with Peter and me about the book. So what's the book this month?
It is going to be the book you would get if you sign up this month is The Bayeux Tapestry, New Interpretation. So it's a collection of essays dealing with how we look at the Bayeux Tapestry, and it's be perfect for to get in October as another passing of the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest. So that is it would be a nice topic and a really good book.
That's right. 'Tis the season for the Battle of Hastings. So if you sign up for our Patreon level, for our book club level right now, that book will come to you in October, and we will talk to you about it at the end of October, which is super exciting. Anything else we need to add, Peter?
No, there's nothing else we need to add.
Except for to say thanks for listening, and go out there and rent Monty Python and the Holy Grail for your next medieval adventure. In addition to being excited about the Lone Medievalist Award for Scholarly Outreach and our 100,000 downloads, I'm really happy to share that my new book with Pen and Sword History will be coming out in the United Kingdom at the end of this month, September 30th. It's called Life in Medieval Europe, Fact and Fiction, and it deals with many of the questions you might have about the Middle Ages after watching Monty Python, and perhaps some that you hadn't thought of. You can pre-order it now, and pre-ordering is actually a really nice thing to do as it helps a book get the boost it needs right at the outset in order to become more visible to more readers. Canadian readers will get their copies December 19th, and Americans January 2nd. For all sorts of articles beyond the ones that Peter just mentioned, follow medievalists.net on Facebook or Twitter at medievalists. You can find me, Danielle Sobalski, on social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5 Minute Medievalist, and you can find my other books on Amazon. Our music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Thank you 100,000 times for listening. Have yourself an amazing day.